Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. We're live here in Fairfax, California with a man who's mastered, he's still learning every day, but a master rhythmist and a guy who's played in almost every different musical setting and continues to this day. Dave Getz, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, nice to be here in my house.
Oh, it's beautiful. You know, I wanted to ask you about the first time that you saw Philly Joe play live and what that experience was like for you.
I'm not sure if I ever saw Philly Joe play live. I'm not sure. You know, I can't really remember. I saw Max Roach play live. I've seen Roy Hayes play live. I've seen Art Blakey play live. I saw Elvin Jones play live. I'm not sure if I ever saw Philly Joe play live. I've seen a lot of video of Philly Joe playing, but, you know.
I just wanted you to talk, you know what it is? I wanted you to talk about the concept that the sheets of sound that were going on, especially when Elvin was playing with Train, and how you attempted to try to incorporate that into into rock drumming, because those guys were stretching vocabulary, but you were taking it into rock music.
Yeah, in some way. I mean, I listened to all those guys, and I kind of, you know, tried in my own kind of like baby steps way at that time when I was in my 20s to kind of play with that kind of feel, but I really didn't have the chops to really, you know, really understand what those guys were doing in some way, although I always loved Roy Hayes' playing. There's just something about his phrasing and melodic sense and, you know, just ideas that appealed to me, you know, a lot. But I kind of really, over the years, I've understood it more and more as I've developed and played more, gotten to play more jazz in my own life. Yeah, you know, and...
How have you evolved? Like, because you're right, it's all baby stuff. I mean, it's all just gradual.
Yeah, for me, it's like particularly since 2002 is really when I started to get back into jazz in a way where I started to really understand it and play with other people who were on a higher level than me, who, you know, bebop players, guys who could play that kind of thing in a serious way. And it's been in those years, probably the last 16 years, that I've had more of an understanding of what that kind of drumming's about and what a lot of drumming's about. And my own thoughts about drumming have really developed over that time. Not just limited to jazz, but just drumming itself as an art form and what it's about and what the issues are and what, you know, what's important in drumming. What makes great drumming? What is it about? All of the different factors. There's not just technique, and there's not just
facility.
There's just a lot of things. There's feel. There's time. There's ideas. There's melodic sense. There's all kinds of the interesting ideas. There's a lot of drummers who are great players who. Old style players who play, you know, like the kind of idea of four-way coordination, where two things going at the same time. You know, the rock, basically most rock music is that idea of kind of like, we have you know, several things going at once, overlapping each other. And then you get into ideas like linear drumming, where you have like a whole different idea where nothing's actually happening at the same time, but it sounds almost more complicated, where you have things like... So no two things are like hitting at the same time. So it's a different concept. It's a more modern concept that's come on. So really understanding that is another level, kind of that, you know, that I sort of felt like I kind of was ready for at a certain point. But there's a lot of things about drumming that...
I want you to talk about your philosophy, because, I mean, this started back, you know, I don't know, the evolution of how you believe about the inner drumming and the spiritual part of drumming. I'd just like you to take us through that and what you believe are the important tenets of being a rhythmist. And the only thing I want to say is that the drum, when you were coming up, was really an accompanist instrument. It is an accompanist instrument, but it became a lead instrument. Those pulse, especially with louder fusion rock, and that's just the evolution of music. But talk about the accompanist component of drumming.
Totally. That's another thing I was trying to think of when I started to say the issues of what drumming is about. That's one of the big ones. One of the thing is like that drumming, for the most part, except when you get into people like, Terry Bozzio and people like that, it's basically a support instrument. You're supporting the music and you're trying to interpret the music that you're playing, which is why, when you look at it, why certain drummers like Ringo Starr, why is Ringo Starr a great drummer? Well, it's not because he has like massive chops or anything like that. It's because of how he took those songs, each of those Beatles songs, and created a drum part, some of these really classic drum parts like Come Together and In My Life and all these things that were really unique drum parts that supported the music. It's the creativity and the creative aspect of drumming that's another whole issue. So it's like, if you understand that part of drumming, which is really where you have to come from in the beginning, you have to understand when you come into a band that sometimes for a drummer you have to just play time. Sometimes just the right thing for playing a song is to do nothing. A good friend of mine who is really the greatest example of that I can think of is Harold Jones. Harold Jones is the master of, like, you watch him and he's doing nothing. Sometimes he's just doing. But his time and his feel is like so on the pulse that everybody loves to play with him. Everybody, instrumentalists and singers want this guy behind him. And he, and even behind a big band. Sometimes I've watched Harold play behind a big band, and I've watched him drop out for like 2 beats and just do nothing, and it's still swinging.
I just interviewed him twice, and I wanted to ask you about the one. Obviously, it's just this propensity to keep incredible swing time, but at the same time, the guitar was a rhythm instrument when Dave Getz was coming up, when Harold Jones was playing with Basie, Freddie Green and him locked in, and that thing was a concrete floor. And the saxophone was the lead instrument, okay? Mm-hmm. And then the guitar became the lead instrument. So how much of Jones's ability, even when he drops out, has to do with the fact that there was a rhythm guitar? I mean, I think that's what's missing in modern music today. A lot of just pulsating rhythm guitar.
Yeah. Guys like Freddie Green, there's not many people like that anymore.
No.
Who just played, who did one thing, but he did it so perfectly that it just locked in everybody else in the band. That kind of thing. And there's not a lot of, I've played with a lot of, different bass players and different rhythm guitarists, and in rock particularly, it's really a great thing to find a second guitar player in a band who really plays rhythm and really makes a difference. And it's not a difference that anybody hears. In Big Brother, for example, I'll give the example that I know of immediately is we have a guitarist that we work with locally, this guy named David Aguilar. And David's a great lead guitarist, but when he plays in Big Brother, he's mostly playing second to Tom Finch. Tom is really most of the lead, and David plays a lot of rhythm. And when David plays in the band, everything changes. It's like the feel of every song is like, it's groovy. It's just groovy. And I don't know what he's doing. When other guys play in the band and do in the same position as the second guitarist, it can be good, but it just never has that groove. And I don't know what David's doing. It's just something about the feel, his touch, his rhythm, where he is in the pulse, in relation to the pulse, in relation to what the feel of the song is going to be. But everything becomes easy. It becomes like really easy for me to play. And a lot of times it moves songs that we played for years and years, sometimes into other grooves that I really like. I'll go with it. Like we've played Piece of My Heart a million times. And when David plays with us, sometimes we all fall into like almost like a reggae rhythm because of just something he's doing. And I love it. I'm saying, wow, this is great. It's like Piece of My Heart as a reggae, and it kind of works. So, you know.
No,
anyway.
it's funny because Fred Tackett, the great the guitar player amazing studio guitar player down in Southern California, he used to go in the studio and the engineer would be like, because he was playing rhythm guitar. And the engineer's like, I can't hear what Tackett's doing. What is he doing?
Yeah.
And Bill Payne from Little Feat would say, take him out of the mix. And the minute they take him out, it totally changed.
Yeah.
So it's the frequency and it's the vibration. And I want you to talk about the vibrational qualities of the drums and how therapeutic it is. I mean, I feel like we've gotten into this, my generation and younger especially, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but we've really become accustomed to going to concerts, sitting there and watching people, watching facility, staring and watching. I only now go to events, and I don't care if it's free jazz or psychedelic rock. I have to be in front of the speakers, so I'm feeling the vibration of the ambient, the natural sound of the band. Can you talk about when you were able to, the therapeutic quality and the vibrational nature of rhythm?
Well, that's a big part of the philosophy too. First of all, the thing you have to know about rhythm, okay, is pulse is not rhythm. Pulse itself is just pulse. And everything, we start out from the premise, this is very philosophical and kind of
intellectual. No, go there.
But,
Jake Feinberg show you.
But everything in the universe is pulsing. Even plants, everything that's living is pulsing, and maybe even everything, if you could say the solar system is alive, because it's pulsing too.
Yeah.
And the whole universe is actually still pulsing from the Big Bang. So pulse is the basic thing. What makes rhythm is pulse plus pattern. Plus pattern equals rhythm. And pattern is something that nature creates. Nature creates pattern with pulse. Pulse is there. And something about life and nature and man, our minds, create pattern and see pattern. And when we impose pattern on pulse, then we get something called rhythm. Even the most basic thing, if you have pulse and you go, here's pulse, and you go, I'm imposing a pattern on
right.
it. I'm making every second one louder. Suddenly I have rhythm. When I just have this, there's not really rhythm, it's just pulse. I mean, some people would say that's rhythm, but to me, I think that's not. I think pulse is itself sort of the basic ingredient that we start with, that's a given. And our minds, our nature is to impose pattern. And pattern and pulse create rhythm. So from there, then it's kind of like each culture has its own way of imposing patterns, different kind of patterns that create different kinds of rhythm. And in some way it's probably endless. Although, you could catalog it right now. You could, if you're someone who studied world percussion, you could probably come up with like a couple of hundred maybe basic patterns from Indian music, Middle Eastern music, African music,
It's
rock
the subdivisions.
and roll, jazz,
Yeah,
and go on down the line, Asian music, all of the different rhythm patterns, and they all in some way are related. They're just slight variations that make something different, that change the feel of it. Something like a pattern like in I think it's an African rhythm. This is one of the basic patterns. They call it, I think in African rhythm, sometimes it's called kata. So that's a rhythm that basically finds its way into New Orleans music, I'm not playing.
I dig, man. No, I did.
It's basically it's the same rhythm. It's the same rhythm, and there's just a million ways it can be, but it's a basic pattern. It's
Well, Well, here's the thing about. I want you to riff on this for a minute because I was just thinking about it. I mean, you talk about just that pulsating bass, just the pulse, just the bass drum, right? It's not.
And it doesn't have to be the bass drum. It's anything that just is a steady. A pulse is defined as an event that is evenly divided. It's just an event. It can be a light flash. It can be a pulse. It can be a bass drum sound. It can be anything. It could be, a hammer hitting a nail. As long as it's an event that where the spaces between them are completely even. It's a regularity. It just creates a pulse, and they can be 10 feet apart, or they can be 1 inch apart. As long as it's like the evenness, as it stays even, then it is a pulse.
Well, this is what I wanted to get to: is the rhythmic patterns, the tension and release. It's it's building up and then letting go. And I'm wondering in Big Brother with Janice, how much of her vocals lent itself to tension and release, where it was more than just the pulse, and ultimately those patterns came into effect.
Janice had great rhythm.
She did.
Janice had really incredible rhythm as a singer, or just as a person, because she's the only singer that's ever played with Big Brother and the holding company who was also, could really play percussion. She loved to play percussion. From the moment she was in Big Brother, she'd pick up a tambourine. It was tambourine, maracas, a güiro, whatever it was. She could basically do it. She could basically keep time and keep really good time with it. So she loved to play percussion, and I have pictures of her. She sat down at the drums every once in a while, and we'd fool around. But she wasn't a drummer. But had she, learned a few patterns, she probably could have played. She probably could have learned, basic rock or blues rhythms. She just was, and that applied to her voice. There's a track of Janice. It's a very famous track on Cheap Thrills called Turtle Blues. And Turtle Blues, one of the things it's basically your basic blues shuffle, a slow shuffle. And one of the things Janice does with her voice is she goes over that with eighth notes, which is a very not an easy thing to do, and a lot of singers can't do it. She's playing, and she's singing, whoa, 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 whoa. Hearing that kind of time, that's like it's like a 3/4, which sometimes is called hemiola. There's like a name for it. It's like the 3/4 kind of thing that she just intuitively understood. I've never played with another singer that could just naturally do that. Just naturally go a rhythm of like 4/3, or a rhythm of 2/4, and or 2/3, or 4/6.
Did you have a rhythm guitar player in Big Brother with her, or
actually, James Gurley played rhythm guitar, and Sam played rhythm. They both switched off lead. In the beginning of Big Brother, Sam was really the rhythm guitar player, and James was more the lead. But as Sam developed, he became more lead, because Sam could play things with changes. Sam basically was a guitarist who was more educated and understood chords and things like that. James Gurley was like really a primitively taught guitarist. He could only really do James Gurley. And he basically was a guy who could play, modally and do what he did, which was, very far out. He had an understanding of sound, of just noise. The fact of using sound and noise in this music, that at that time, a lot of people thought, well, it's not musical because it's not melodic. It didn't have notes. But James was like ahead of the curve in that way. He was right from the beginning starting to use like just feedback in itself and banging the amps and creating sound and kind of just sometimes just ripping at the strings and just creating, these sounds out of the guitar. That was just, kind of way ahead of its time in a way. But that's what he could do. He couldn't really, James was not a guitarist who you could say, okay, we're going to play a song with, these are the changes. It wasn't like really what he was good at. Sam was like, so as we started to do more songs, and Janis brought in more songs that had, more than 3 chords or more than 2 chords. So Sam became the guy who could play lead on it, who could move from like F sharp into A minor and things like that. Whereas James wasn't the guy for that kind of thing. James was the guy, give him a space, an open space, and just put him in it and just create kind of over it. And which is what he did in Combination of Two and in Ball and Chain and things like that.
What in the live context was Gurley very effective with the feedback? I don't think I'm really aware of the fact.
On certain songs, certain songs, that's what it was. It was like James had to have the space for him to operate. And I think in the early Big Brother, there was a lot of those spaces because we were more like improvisatory and we would just do modal things, a lot of modal stuff that just didn't move through various chord changes. As we progressed more and more, and Sam began to write, and we started to do songs, James's guitar, we would try to fit it in. It became more like a kind of thing of trying to fit it in, and sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes we couldn't fit it in, or it was awkward to fit it in. It was like, it was like an attempt to try to make something fit that really belonged in another arena. So, and I'm, not trying to be too
people are having a ball. No, you are
because he had what he had. But
I dig. No, I mean, Delgado told me yesterday he heard a radio broadcast back when he was a kid of Gene Krupa, and the response from the crowd auditorily on the radio was so inspiring that he wanted to be. That's what he wanted to do, and it was an auditory medium. And you were a Krupa guy.
A little bit in the beginning, I learned all of that. The sing, sing, sing. We all played it as kids, when 15, 16, that was a big thing to play the Cooper thing, It's still great. It's still kind of it's a classic thing, And every drummer in the 30s, I don't know whether after Sing 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 or before, but every drummer had their own, variation of it. You had to sort of pick up your own kind of floor tom thing,
Not that, I mean, but it was, what was impressive to me is that for Vince, it was an auditory thing, not a visual thing. He when he heard the response from the crowd was awe-inspiring. I mean, I'm curious about, when did you have a defining moment when you realized that that's what you wanted to do, is be a drummer?
I didn't. No, I didn't want to be a drummer.
You didn't. You want to be a painter. You wanted to be a painter.
I'll tell you. The reason I didn't, from the time I was like 15, we did this in a previous interview, but I'm going to repeat.
No, riff on it.
From the time I was 15 to the time I was like 19, I played in a lot of like dance bands and club date bands, and I played a lot of bar mitzvahs and weddings and hotels, and I played with a lot of older guys who were like old school, Musicians Union, New York 802 guys. I played with a lot of guys who were like walking fake books, who knew like 2,000 songs and played all the hotel circuits and things like that. And in those days, being a musician, from what I saw of it as a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, was that basically you were part of the servant class of people in New York. This is New York, Brooklyn, and that whole scene. So I didn't want to be part of that servant class. I knew I would play sometimes with guys who were great players, some guys who were jazz players in New York, doing club dates for money. And we'd be playing like a society party on Upper Park Avenue, and you'd have to go through the service entrance, just like the waiters or the caterers or something like that.
Wow.
And you wouldn't like hang with the guests. When you took a break, you go into this other room and sit at the table with the maid and the people that are serving the food. You weren't like treated as an elite. If you were elite, it was the elite of the servant class. You were part of the servant class. When I got into rock and roll, or when I all of a sudden I didn't want to be a musician. I went to art school and I wanted to be an artist, and I was very good at it. As you can, if you look around my studio, that's what I do a lot now. I basically make art. So, and that's what I wanted to be. And to me, being an artist was being part of a higher culture in some way. I wanted to kind of rise out of the lower class culture that I grew up in, and I wanted to be more than that. I wanted to be something that was taken seriously as an artist,
Big.
as a quote unquote artist. So I went to art school and I I got my degree. I got a master's degree. I won a Fulbright, and I was teaching art. And I basically, when I came out to California, I was 20 years old, and I sort of didn't really want to do gigs anymore. I had traveled through Europe with a Dixieland band called Rick Lundy and the Saints when I was 19, and that was my last major gig. And then I got into art school in San Francisco. I came out to San Francisco, and the only time I played drums was at parties at the San Francisco Art Institute. There was like a Dixieland band that consisted of art teachers, of mostly painters, well-known painters, David Park, Elmer Bishop, Wally Hedrick, these guys, and they saw that I played drums and immediately recruited me into their band. But the band only played at parties. I didn't do gigs for almost 6 years. So from 1960 to 1966, I was mostly an artist, and once in a while I would jam with people. I had a set of drums in my studio. I had a studio where I painted, and that's how I met Peter Alban. The rock scene thing started in San Francisco, and I saw some of the early bands playing, like the Charlatans, and I saw Big Brother, and I saw the Jefferson Airplane, and I saw, some of those early bands.
The Great
like that.
Society.
Yeah, the Great Society. And most of the drummers, I would say, for the most part, didn't impress me and to what they were doing. And I thought, well, I can do this. Literally with one hand, I thought, I can do this blindfolded with one hand tied behind my back. So the entry level, the ante level at that time was very low. And when I met Peter, the way I met Peter was I had a studio in the Mission District where I painted, and I was teaching at the Art Institute. I was teaching beginning and intermediate painting. I'd been hired by the school I graduated from because I was one of the star pupils at that school, and they hired me back as a teacher. And I was on my way to a big art career as, kind of exhibiting, galleries, all of that world. And I started going to these dances, and I dropped acid a couple of times, and I started to get turned on to what was going on in San Francisco, and I wanted to be in a band. I just wanted to be in one of these bands. And then one day I went downstairs to get lunch, and I saw this guy with long hair, who was Peter Alban, and I literally went over to him and I said, "Why do you have long hair? How do you get away with having shoulder-length hair?" And he said, "Well, I'm in a rock band." This is true. I mean, it sounds crazy now. But, we just struck up a friendship, and I heard Big Brother and Holding Company, and when I heard them, I went back to Peter, and I said, well, if you ever get rid of your drummer, which you should, because he's not powerful enough, he's not generating enough energy for what you guys are trying to do. And, anyway, long story short, after trying a couple of other guys out, they called me one night, and I was in the band. So then suddenly I was trying to figure out in my life, how am I going to be a painter and keep teaching art and have this career as an artist and be in this rock band? And this is before Janis. So it was just like four guys, and it was, kind of this freaky music. We didn't have any ideas that we would ever be really successful or make records or make any money. We were making some money, and it was good money in those days. We'd do a gig and we'd all have $75 and think, I'm rich.
Well, that was enough to pay the rent.
Exactly, 1966. This was enough that my rent was $55, $60. So that was enough to pay the rent. So, I never really knew how I was going to have to make a decision about a career. Am I going to give up painting? Am I going to be a drummer, And then when Janis joined the band, everybody said, well, we all got to live together. And that was the moment, I think, where I had to make this choice. And I made the choice. I said, I got to go with this. I got to see where it goes. And I tried in the beginning to sort of keep doing art. But it was impossible. And it really took me about 13 years before I actually got back to where I started to get some momentum again. I was living in L.A., as a matter of fact. I was living in L.A., and I was in a band in L.A. for 5 years called Passengers. And that band had almost, green light, record contracts, and then it didn't happen. And at some point in 1979, I said, that's it. I'm going back to art. And I got a studio in Santa Monica. I went out and rented a studio, and I started to do printmaking. And I became a printmaker. And for basically the next 7 years, from 1980 to 87, I again mostly did art. I played with some people. I had a little band for a while with a guy named John York, who was part of the Byrds for a while. But mostly, I didn't do any gigs. I've probably between 1980 and maybe 87, I might have played 3 or 4 gigs. And all that time, mostly, I was a printmaker. I was exhibition chairman of the Los Angeles Printmaking Society. I was I was selling stuff in galleries. I was working literally like full-time job, going to my studio every day, cranking out editions, screen-printed editions of my work. And in 1987, I moved back here to Fairfax, and that's when the guys in Big Brother all of a sudden all showed up in Marin County, and someone called us all up separately, and someone said, I want you guys to get back together as a band and play for the 20th anniversary of the Summer of Love. And the particular guy who was asking us to do this was a guy we all kind of didn't like, but we started talking to each other again, and anyway, as they say again, the rest is history. Suddenly, I'm back in the band. I'm doing Big Brother and the Holding Company again, and I'm not doing art, and I'm living in the Bay Area again, and I'm not in L.A. anymore. So it just, my whole life story is this back and forth thing. Right now, I'd say it's sort of balanced because I'm playing a lot of gigs with Big Brother. I'm playing also some jazz gigs with other people, things like that, and I'm working on my art. I'm not exhibiting that much or selling work as much, but I'm loving what I'm doing, and it's important to me as an expression of who I am. It's something like I gotta do, just like I have to drum.
Yeah.
I cannot not drum. If I go for like 4 or 5 days without playing the drums, I literally start to get sick. It's like letting my rhythm muscles fall apart. They sort of atrophy if you don't use them. And it's the same thing with art. It's like I gotta keep doing it and gotta keep expressing these visual ideas in the same way I've got expressing these sound and rhythmic ideas. It's gotta sort of, you're channeling it. You're channeling stuff through you. And it's really like a healthy thing. It sounds very corny, but it's really like a life force. It's a life energy. Rhythm is for sure like a life force energy. And it's, and people are starting to discover that because these guys go into like nursing homes with drums now. And it really has a curative power to it for people who have never done it before, to connect with rhythm, to connect with pulse. The pulse not only that's inside you, which it is, but also the pulse that's all around us, that, to connect to that energy, that life force, which is, as Rudolf Steiner says, rhythm is the carrier of life, and that's what it is, so.
Did you, it's funny, I was
End of rant.
No, that was, you wrapped it all together. People are having a ball. Did you wind up spending time in Bolinas ever? There were
not a lot of time.
There were a lot of poets out there,
Yeah.
a lot of very famous, and I just wonder, in and around when you had time off from Big Brother, or even before it started, did you collaborate with poets at all?
No, I do know. I know one poet out in Bolinas, Duncan McNaughton, is a poet.
Is he still with us?
I think he's still out there. He married an old girlfriend of mine named Jeannie, and they have a bunch of kids, and they're still out there. And Duncan's a great poet, really good poet. I wish I knew more poets. Actually, it's something. I get a thing every day. I get an internet thing that's sent to me. It's like the poem of the day, and I get all of this poetry. So I read poetry almost every day.
Well, I was curious about if you could talk, because, you were the most articulate person about this, and every time I bring it up to people, they said, I've never heard of that, but the League for Internal Freedom, Can you riff on that? Because we have all these cannabis houses in Tucson everywhere now, but you're telling me that there was a place you could go and get LSD for free.
When I was 24, I won a Fulbright fellowship, and I lived in Poland for a year, which is actually where I started playing drums again. It's, I sort of skipped that part. But when I was in Poland, I was painting, and I kind of lost my studio space, and I started hanging out in the jazz club in Krakow. And I wound up playing with a lot of really great Polish jazz musicians, many of whom I'm still in contact with. But when I came back, the free speech movement was happening, and LSD was happening. And the girl that was my girlfriend, who I lived with, we got back together in 1965, and she was a person who was very into Jungian philosophy. And, she'd gone to Oberlin, Carl Jung. And she was into that whole kind of thing, that new age. It wasn't called New Age then. It was just a lot of people that were kind of exploring the edges of spirituality and this sort of new spirituality. Alan Watts. I'm trying to think, of some of the people's names, but Claudia Naranjo, Bob Jolly. Anyway. So she was kind of on the periphery of that movement, and she joined something called the League, I think it was called the League for Internal Freedom, which is when LSD was, I believe it was still legal. I'm pretty sure it was still legal till sometime in 1966.
You're right.
So I came back to California. I came back to San Francisco in like the summer, like I think it was June of '65. From Poland, and she had this acid. She had gotten this Sandoz LSD. It was in a capsule, and she prepped me for it. Like, it was a very serious thing. It was not kind of like, okay, we're going to drop acid and go drive around the city.
Right. It was a secret
like
thing.
one of these things where she had the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and she would read these different things to me from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I basically just stayed on a couch, I think, for probably 6 or 7 hours. And it was mostly an internal thing. It was like a kind of your first really serious acid trip. It was a very internal journey inward for me. But that's that. And then she gave me some. We eventually broke up, but she gave me some of this pharmaceutical Sandoz acid. She had it, and so it was the League for Internal Freedom.
How many was it? One place? Was there different dispensaries? I
don't know how she joined it. I was
really
not
phenomenal,
there. See,
yeah.
Like I said, I came back and she had already been part of this thing, and she'd already taken acid under the same kind of supervision with one of these guys who was one of the first people. I don't know who it was, but she was hanging out with these guys who were, and these people basically who were this, really exploring, and really, most of them were scientists. Most of them were guys who were like professors at UC Berkeley and places like that. She was from Oberlin. She had gone to Oberlin, and as I say, she was part of this whole Jungian kind of group of people that,
Did it change your? Once you started to ingest acid, did you play on acid before?
I don't think I played on acid. I played on acid a couple of times. It's not something I did a lot. It's not like Big Brother wasn't like the Grateful Dead at all.
But you shared bills with them, and they always said hide the open containers of liquid.
The couple of times I played on acid was because I was dosed.
Right. And I believe in some. I'm not making it out to be a joke. I just think a lot of pretty square cats did get dosed, and it helped them have a wider view of society. I'm pretty convinced of that. But you didn't take it willingly on the bandstand. One thing I didn't ask you about the first time around was your relationship with Bill Graham, and I wanted you to talk about not just his significance to music, but the kind of, to me, it's just fascinating because, I mean, you could have the Preservation Hall Jazz Band with, Big Brother and, Tiny Tim at the same thing. Or you could have, you could be having Charles Lloyd with you guys. And can you talk about the first real definitive memory of Bill Graham that you have?
Okay. I'm going to say some things that probably some people don't want to hear,
People are having
First
a
of
ball.
all, I think Chet Helms doesn't get the credit
Yeah,
he
thank you.
deserves.
That's right. Family Dog.
I think Chet Helms was the first visionary of that idea of bringing in groups that were different, things like that. Bill, I think, picked up on it. Bill, in the beginning, Bill's motivation, let me just say this. Bill's motivation in the beginning was not a visionary motivation about changing the world.
No.
Bill saw money. Bill saw dollar signs, and he saw a career where he could use the kind of energy and the kind of skills that he had to organize things and put on events, and that he could be the guy to do it. And he saw that it would, generate money. And I think, and it would have a life of its own. As it went on, he became more and more wrapped up in the vision of what it was about. He became influenced by the people he was hiring, against his own wishes, I think, in some way. It was despite himself, because in the beginning he was a real hard-ass motherfucker.
Sure.
He was a real hard, and everybody will agree with me about that, probably. He was a real hard-ass motherfucker. He was very hard to deal with. He didn't pay bands enough. He tried to get you for the least amount of money he could, and chew you down, all of the managers, as much as he could. If you weren't somebody who he really, really thought he needed, he could treat you like shit. He would try to humiliate people. He would put you in a shitty dressing room. He would do things like kind of gratuitous kind of things sometimes that were really not nice for no reason at all except to sort of exert his power over you.
We're talking about local Bay Area bands or
I'm
bands?
talking about local Bay Area bands, and I'm talking even later on. I'll give you an example of it. Bill wouldn't hire Big Brother and the Holding Company for a long time. And he wouldn't hire Big Brother and the Holding Company because we were associated with the Avalon Ballroom. And Chet had been our manager, and we were very close to Chet. So for a long time, Bill wouldn't hire us, despite the fact that there are some early Fillmore posters with Big Brother on them. Some of those events were not promoted by Bill. There were other events at the Fillmore. And anyway, Bill did not hire us, or not really want to hire us, until after Monterey. And he knew that after Monterey, he had to hire us. Actually the first one after Monterey was the Jefferson Airplane was supposed to appear with Jimi Hendrix, and the Jefferson Airplane, for whatever reason, copped out of the gig, and Big Brother and Jimi Hendrix played the Fillmore. It was like 1 or 2 weekends right after Monterey. And after that, he became our friend. So we played for him a lot, and he started to treat us in a different way. He tried to treat us with respect, but particularly Janice. He sucked up to Janice, and he made friends with Janice, and he, brought flowers in the dressing room and made sure she had a bottle of whiskey, and all of these little things that, extra little things that he did for Janice. When Janice left Big Brother and the Holding Company, about a year after that, in 1970, in April of 1970, Janice had disbanded the Cosmic Blues Band. And she was in between the Cosmic Blues Band and the next band, which was going to be the Full Tilt Boogie Band. But she didn't have that band yet. She had dissolved the Cosmic Blues Band. And Bill saw an opportunity, and Bill called up Janice and Big Brother, and he said, would you guys do a gig at the Fillmore, a reunion? At that time, it was already, he had taken over the Carousel Ballroom and made it the Fillmore West. So we said, okay, sure. So what does he do? He secretly offers Albert Grossman, who was Janice's manager, he says, I'll pay her $2,000. And what does he offer? We don't have a manager. Big Brother doesn't have a manager at this point. So he calls up, he says, I'll give you guys $500. So he's going to give Janice $2,000, and he's going to give the four of us $500. And we said to him, fuck you. Fuck you, Bill. We're not going to play for,
Did you know that Janice tip you off to that? Or
technically, when Big Brother and the Holding Company was a band together, we were all equal. So technically speaking, if Janice was getting $2,000, he would have had to pay us $8,000. But we knew he wasn't going to pay us $8,000. So what finally happened is he paid us $2,000 and he paid her $2,000. But he was very reluctant. He was pissed off about it. He wanted to pay us $500. I'll tell you another thing about Bill. That's not nice. That's not a nice thing about Bill. When Big Brother got back together in 1987, we all were living up here, and we got back together, and we didn't have a manager, and for like the first few months we were back together, there was this local guy who was managing a band called the Dinosaurs.
Oh.
And Steve Kaiser is the name. And
Kaiser,
Steve
yeah.
said, Steve, I'll manage you guys, and so on like that. And after a couple of months of Steve Kaiser, we realized Steve Kaiser was not really the person we wanted to manage us. It took, not long. It was maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks of Steve Kaiser. And we called up Bill Graham. And Bill Graham said, would you consider managing us or helping us in some way? We're back together as a band. And what Bill said was, fuck you. When you got back together, you should have come to me first. And the fact that you didn't come to me, I don't want anything to do with you. So basically it was like, you didn't come and kiss my ring, so now I'm not going to do it for you. I would if you had, he's basically saying, I would have managed you, I would have helped you if you had understood that I'm the king, that I'm the Don, basically at that point, and you have to come and kiss my ring, and you didn't, so now I'm going to punish you. I'm going to basically exclude you, and you're not going to hire you, and I'm not going to manage you, I'm not going to help you in any way. And he made that very clear. Then, when the earthquake happened in 1989,
yeah,
he did this thing called the earthquake benefit, big earthquake benefit, and he called us up and asked us to play at it. And we said, for sure, we'll play at it. And we played at it. And I remember, this is the last time I saw Bill alive, because he came through, there was like a backstage area, and he basically came through, and it was just like watching something out of The Godfather. It was like watching someone come through, and he had a couple of people around him, like security people, and he was like a couple of women. It was like about 5 people, and he was walking through in front of them, and he'd come over to band and just like, hello, and sort of give them his blessing, like the Pope. And it was, it was kind of like, now I'm going to tell you some great things about Bill Graham.
Yeah.
No one could do what Bill Graham did. Bill Graham is totally essential to the success of the San Francisco music scene. And what he did and how what he did, he was the best at. He was the best at promoting a gig and putting it together. Way, way better.
And paying
than
the
Chet.
lead act,
And,
2000.
yeah. Making arrangements. If you were, a band that he really wanted to show something to, he would really lay out the red carpet. He knew how to do it. He knew how to throw a party. He knew how to put on a gig. There's no one who could do it better than he did. And in that sense, I have tremendous respect for him. He also, had great energy. I mean, his incredible energy. And the people he did help, like Carlos Santana, and when he took on sort of when he started to really love the Grateful Dead, he really, helped them. And he helped the band, the people, when he decided he liked you and he wanted to help you, he could really do miracles for you. He had a lot of power. He was I would say mostly what Bill was about, and my other stories are basically confirm this, he was about power, not money. He was not about sex. He didn't have he had women, different things and different affairs, but he wasn't a guy who was fucking a lot of groupies
Right.
or
He
things
wasn't
like
a womanizer.
That wasn't his
Right, I
trip.
do.
His trip was power, was having the power. And he had plenty of money. and he gave money away. He'd support, a lot of like the local Jewish temple. He gave a lot of money to Temple Emmanuel in the city and things like that, and Israel, things like that. He was very, and understandably, he was, he really, his Jewish identity was very important to him, and I really respected that about him. That was a great thing, that I felt he was very proud of his heritage and the fact that he was basically a Holocaust survivor.
That's right.
And what that meant, and and educating people and promoting organizations that promoted that idea and educated people about that idea.
Well, that's what, when Charles Sullivan, when he was, the Fillmore was next to a synagogue, and the rabbi was giving Charles Sullivan a heck of a time, and then Bill Graham, because people were urinating outside the synagogue and causing a lot of problem. And Bill, he said, "My people don't." The rabbi said, "My people don't appreciate this." And he goes, "My people." He goes, "I'm one of them." And then he went off on this tangent about being a survivor. Now, I mean, the Helms thing is basically, to me, there was some competition there. I don't know how to square the circle with the later episode, but would there have been a San Francisco scene as long as it was, and how it grew regionally without him?
Without either of them. They're both essential. Chet and Bill are both essential. But Chet was really like an intellectual. Chet, one of the reasons Big Brother fired Chet as our manager, and it was basically Janice, I'm putting this down for a lot of people don't know this. Chet was our manager, and we used to have meetings with Chet. And Chet would he was very intellectual, very philosophical about how the music is going to change the world, about how what was happening in San Francisco and what we were doing was going to spread and bring people in and really affect society and change the culture. And that's why it was important. And he would pontificate. He would go on and on about it, and we would all sit there. And Janice herself had a very materialistic, pragmatic streak where she really wanted to make it.
Right.
She wanted to make it, and she wanted to make money.
Right.
And and she would say, "Come on, Chet, get the fuck out of your ivory tower. Let's get some gig. Do you have some gigs for us?" And stuff like that.
You got a gig?
It was like this conflict between. Most of the guys in the band were very tolerant of Chet. We thought in some way there was a conflict between him running the Avalon and his sort of his philosophical ideas, as opposed to the pragmatic sense of what it took and what we wanted from a manager running the band. But we were accepting of that. We were accepting that he was a great guy and we loved him. But Janice was the one who mostly thought, we got to get a real manager. We got to get somebody else. So basically what happened was we fired Chet, and then we went to Chicago without a manager, and we got into this terrible contract with a record company that Chet had actually warned us about. That Chet had said, do not sign with this guy, Bobby Shad. He's a shark. He's a bad guy.
God, I hate hearing that. I idolize that motherfucker.
We were down and out in Chicago, really broke. And this guy came along and offered us a record contract, and no advance money, but we could make studio time. As union musicians, we could make studio time, which was enough to get us back to San Francisco. And then we were suddenly in a record contract.
That record that was cut on Mainstream was cut. Was that in Chicago? Cut in
Mainstream
Chicago?
Records. But Chet, well, I won't go on about Chet. But Chet and Bill, I think were, the two very different people, but both kind of essential. That Chet's influence and Chet's vision affected a lot of people, and a lot of people did what they were doing in the San Francisco scene for the same kind of reasons that Chet was doing what he was doing. Bill was kind of Bill. He was his own thing, and he had his own organization, It was very like business-like. He kept it, you know. I mean, he really controlled everything. He controlled the people who worked at the Fillmore, the security people. He really had everything wrapped up tight. He was the boss. He was unquestionably the boss, the guy in charge, and who took responsibility also. Chet's organization was like loose, you know. Who's running this? Tonight, this guy's doing this, that guy's doing that, who's on the lights. You know, it never quite was like, you know, it was like run like more like a hippie commune, you know.
You know, can you just talk to the audience in your own opinion about how the significance of music has changed in our culture?
Definitely, the significant. Well, you know, people come up, a lot of people come up now. When Big Brother goes out on the road, we play a gig, and very often, you know, when I say very often, a few dozen times over the past few years, young people come up. Mm-hmm. People who are like in their 20s or, you know, even teenagers. And they say there's something that really kind of shocks me in a way. They'll say, boy, I wish I was alive during the 60s. What, you know, a time you guys were alive in, where the music really mattered. Sort of what you just said, you know. This idea that the time that they're living in, they don't relate, some of them, a lot of them don't relate to rap, hip hop, the kind of music that's basically controls the pop music market now. What I say about that, my own feeling is that I know there's great music happening now. I know there's brilliant music happening now, and there's some great artists happening now. The problem is its effect, its efficacy in terms of the culture, its impact on the culture is not there. The great music is underground, is completely underground, and it has an audience, but the audience is like the super hip underground counterculture. There are people like my daughter, who is like a songwriter, singer in LA, who, you know, likes bands like the Shins and things like that, and listens to that. But that, you know, and it's not like bands like that don't record and don't have an audience, but they're like poetry and they're like art. And the art music is like, it's a sort of a, it's like a, you know, it just doesn't have the effect. Like in the 60s, what we were doing was, you know, directly, it was the charts. It was basically, that's what was on the charts. When we did Cheap Thrills, it was like the Doors were, I think we knocked the Doors out of number 1. Jimi Hendrix might have been number 3. The Beatles were there at number 4. You know, all of the top albums were bands that were creative, that were trying to make art, that were trying to make rock and roll art out of rock and roll music. And rock and roll music. And it was really like affecting the culture. It was really a sense that it was the music was going to be part of this movement that changed the world. Now I don't think anybody thinks that music is going to change the world. I mean, maybe a lot of people think that hip-hop culture is changing the world, but there's a lot of pushback on that. As obviously you can see from the racism and the, you know, the Trump thing and all of that, a lot of that is a pushback on the fact that black culture through the hip-hop and rap and things like that have become a little too much for, you know, the white culture to kind of withstand, and they want to knock it back, you know. Whereas like,
well, I wanted to bring this. Phil Ramlin, a great trombone player, played with Freddie Hubbard. He said that, you know, pop music or, you know, radio play music, stuff that Cheap Thrills, like you said, was on the radio. It's today that music is made for pacification. It's not made for burning. Mm-hmm. So people can't really detect with their ears what is burning feeling music, because it's either about multitasking, you're doing stuff while you're listening to music, you're doing other things, you're being pacified. And to me, that is more than anything else, the issue is the fact that we have, as a society, learned, I mean, yeah, you go to a show, let the body dance, but more often than not, I mean, I was in Bakersfield, I was going to go see Elvin Bishop. He's got a trio up there, right? I love Elvin, I'm not a huge fan of his music, but the guy's, I'm like, where's the dance floor? He's like, no, there is no dance floor. It's a sit-down show. I said, I fall asleep. So, I mean, it's just this whole convergence. I guess maybe the better question is to younger cats out there, how do you burn? How do you feel? How can you burn?
Yeah. I don't know anymore, you know. I think in my own career now, honestly, I have to be very honest about it. It's like I love to play. And when I can go out and play with Big Brother, what happens is I get a chance to play out, to play really full volume out, full energy out. And if for a 79-year-old guy like me, I'll be 79 next month, it's still great. You know, it's just great to be able to do that. But the audience we're playing for and the effect it's having, it's really, it's just, you know, it's old, a lot of old hippies, and as I say, there are some young people. There's a younger crowd that have heard the music and want to, you know, sort of connect, see the original guys, and, you know, sort of make that connection with them. But I don't think we're having any kind of, like, impact. We're going on something, Big Brother's going in March, at the end of March, we're going on something called the Flower Power Cruise. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
It's fucking ridiculous, you know? But at the same time, it'll be a boat full of like 60, 70-year-old people who at some point in their life made a journey into that music, spent a few weeks in the Haight-Ashbury, whatever, you know, and they made some connection. Now they're coming back. It's a kind of nostalgia trip. It's a nostalgia, and they love the music, and they connect with it, and they think it's great, and it's great that we can still play the music and still make money from it, which is another, you know, thing I have to be on. I can still, when I go out with a jazz group, if I go out with my jazz trio and play like an art gallery somewhere, maybe I can make $150.
Right.
Whereas if I go out with Big Brother can still make, you know, anywhere from a few thousand to $10,000 if we play a state fair or something like that. So we can make significant real money as a band. Everybody in the band can make some, you know, some money.
And then, I mean,
that's
again,
important. That's, you know,
yeah.
that's what part of what you're doing it for. So that's the efficacy now for me as a drummer. It's still getting to play, and still getting to play for people who really appreciate the music, young and old, and who look. But in terms of some kind of cultural effect that it's having, no, I don't have any illusions about that. We're definitely, you know, our days were past a long time ago. Our days of really being important in what we did culturally and music, the what we had to say in terms of music is happened. It had its most important moment, and it's had its most powerful moment 50 years ago. But, you know, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I have to accept that. And as a musician, you just want to keep playing until you're dead. You just want to, and I want to play lots of different things. I don't just want to play Big Brother and Hold the Company. Now I want to play other kinds of music. I got gigs that sometimes I go out and play with singers who, I play with one singer who does, you know, things like Volare. And, I mean, Italian, it's O Solo Mio. And as a drummer, it's like, how am I going to interpret that? You know, it's sort of like an interesting challenge to play all of these different styles and kind of be able to play like Latin, be able to play Latin styles, be able to play jazz, be able to play like, you know.
Well, I mean, it's no different than when you were playing the Jewish comedians.
In some way, it's not.
You know, because you had to play those four different grooves,
it's
you know?
full circle in a
Right.
funny
It's a
way.
beautiful
It
full
feels
circle.
that way. I sometimes feel like I'm back to where I was when I was 15, 16, 17.
You are.
You know?
Hey, you know, well, let's go full circle as we finish out. Can you play a little bit more on the trap stuff? People are just loving it.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see what we can play. Let's see. kind of Dixieland stuff.
Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you all later.
Okay. That's a mess, but you know.